Hey guys, this is Ben with the Trailhead, and today I'll show you how to get a free boat. Check us out on other platforms. So finding a free boat is not hard. If you go on Marketplace or anything like that, you'll find free boats are very cheap boats. The problem is, when you get that boat, is it worth owning? So I'm going to show you what I look for when I'm getting a cheap or free boat. These are things I've learned over the years, so hopefully you don't have to make the same mistakes that I made. So this little background, I have owned 8 cheap or free boats over my lifespan. During that time, I've made a lot of mistakes, and I've got some boats that have had issues. So I've learned from them. So let me show you what I look for when I'm getting a cheap, free, crappy boat. I just want to thank everyone that has subscribed to our channel. We really appreciate it. If you haven't, please hit subscribe below. Make sure to like the video and check out our other videos. Enjoy the rest of the video. All right, so when I arrive to the boat, first off, I look at where it's at. So, for example, tires are not sunk into the ground. There's no grass growing around it. Obviously there isn't, because I put the boat here just a few weeks ago. So, you know, this one's gonna look a lot better because of that, but just something I'll look at. I start at the very front, look at the wiring, look at the chains, make sure everything looks like it works correctly. The jack, that's a brand new jack or newer jack. So that's a good sign that this boat was taken care of. I like to look at the winch, make sure it looks like it's in good shape. It's not gonna break on the way down the road. Remember, you gotta get this boat home. As I'm walking down the boat, I like to look to see if there's any big gouges, any big fiberglass damage. As I get to this point, I'd like to look at this. This is the registration number. So in Virginia, this registration is good for 3 years. So that means this boat was last registered in 2021. Meaning that's maybe the last time this boat was in the water. So something just to think about. That way you know how long ago the boat's been sitting possibly. It's not the most accurate thing, but just something you can keep in mind. If it says 1988, you know this boat hasn't been used in a long time. I start working my way down the trailer, so make sure there's no damage on the trailer, no damage on the boat. As I get to the wheels, I like to look for dry rot. I also like to look at this right here. This is a great sign of someone taking care of a boat. This is a bearing buddy. That means it makes it extremely easy to grease this hub, meaning they're gonna take care of it. That's an upgrade. That's something someone added. So, after I looked at the tires, make sure they're not gonna fall apart driving down the road, I keep working my way back, looking at the hull and looking at the trailer for any damage. I get back to the lights. I notice with this boat especially, it has LED lights. That would be an upgrade for this boat, because in 1983, they didn't have LED lights. So now that I get the hull, this is where some of the biggest money and time costly things are on a boat. So first off, I notice there's a strap. 9 times out of 10, if there's a strap tied to the stern drive or tied to the motor holding it up, that means the trim unit is bad on the boat. To me, it's not a deal breaker, but some people that is. I then like to look at the hull itself and like to knock and listen for any hollow spots, making sure there's no hollow spots in the transom, meaning that there's rot in the transom. If it has a rotted transom, you might as well just walk away. It's not worth your time. I like to look at the bellows, these rubber things down here. Rotten bellows is the quickest way to sink a boat on the water. Everything looks good. As I get back to the motor, for this motor, I noticed that it's been painted. Someone tried to make this boat look nice. It means they put time into it, and that's a good sign. I look at the prop. I try to pull it in and out. If it doesn't move, that's great. Try to spin it, make sure there's no weird mechanical noises. See if the prop is damaged. A new prop, you're looking at anywhere from $300 to $1,000 depending on the boat. I also like to look at the skeg. This piece down here might not seem very important, but this is what protects the prop while using the boat. If this is badly damaged, that means they've ran into stuff, which means there could be other things damaged on the boat. I like to keep going around and knocking the transom, make sure everything's good. And for this case, it was, which is a great sign. And then I like to work my way back up the other side and look at the hull. Same thing, the tire on this side and the trailer on this side. So that's everything I look at on the outside of the boat. So let's hop up inside and I'll show you what to look for inside the boat. All right, now that I'm in the boat, I like to walk around every inch of the boat, seeing if I feel any soft spots. Fiberglass is not something that is necessarily super hard to do, but it takes time and money. And 9 times out of 10, if the floor is bad, the stringers underneath could be bad. So it's something, another reason I think I would stay away from on a boat. I also like to look at the vinyl. So this is just a cosmetic thing, but it's an extremely costly cosmetic thing. Replacing vinyl on boats is ridiculous. Just replacing this front area on the boat, you might be looking at $1,000 worth of costs to have someone to recover those for you. And you know, that means the boat's never going to look nice, and that's always going to bother me if I owned a boat like that. For these seats, you can just replace them, but even replacing them, you're looking at anywhere from $300 to $500 to replace just one of these seats. So that's something that's very important to me, because that will save you a lot of money in the long run. And you can see here, there's actually ripping in the stitching. So that one is damaged. Looks like the other one isn't, which for me is not a big deal because I plan on pulling this out. So next thing I'd like to check is the battery. So the battery's already been pulled out, but I like to notice the date on the battery. If it's really old and doesn't look like it's been taken care of, or doesn't have a trickle charger on it, and it's in the winter, most likely that means that battery's no good anymore. So you're gonna have to buy a new battery. Luckily, you're only looking at about $100 to $150 to replace that. It's not a huge thing, but it is something you're gonna have to replace. So if there is a battery in it, I like to come to the battery cutoff switch and turn it on. I like to come up here and first off, make sure there's a key. You can replace that, but that's something more you have to do. And if there's a battery, I don't start it, but I just flip on the power to see what gauges are flipped over. That tells me what's working electronically. This one, there's no battery hooked up, so nothing's gonna happen, but that's something I like to check because it'll save you a lot of trouble in the long run, so you don't have to go back and fix things. Another thing I know, especially with this boat, all these gauges are actually pretty new, meaning once again, someone took care of this boat, and that's a good sign for me. So now that I checked those, next thing I noticed is a fuel water separator. Another sign of someone taking care of a boat. Every boat should have one of these, but not everyone puts it on their boat. It's an upgrade. And it's something that a lot, especially older boats, don't have. So seeing that's a great sign. So next I like to come to the motor itself. Mechanically, I like to look at a few things. Outside the boat, the only mechanical thing I like to worry about is, as it's on the prop, but I also like to check the lower unit oil. It is just a single screw on the bottom, typically a flathead, that you loosen and see if any water comes out or if it's milky. That's a bad sign, meaning the seals are bad on that lower unit, and that's a costly replacement. So we're gonna get into that in another video because I don't want this video to run long. We're gonna do a will it run video next week. So we'll skip that from now, but that's something I like to check. Next thing on the motor itself, first off, I like to look at the quality of the motor. Paint. The belts to see if they're in good shape, see if they spin. I mean, these are all things you can check. I like to check the oil. The oil is a big sign on the quality of the engine. So oil is right where it should be, and it's not milky. It also doesn't look brand new. That's actually a good sign for getting a boat. The reason I say that is, if that oil looked brand new, that means they recently replaced it. If it looks used, most likely it has been used, meaning they didn't change it out because of bad oil, aka milky oil. So that's a good sign to me. Now, if the battery was here, I would like to turn the motor over and see what it does. It's something I don't have right now, so I can't do that, but that is something to look at. Now, looking at this motor, I notice there's one spark plug wire that I had replaced. I also notice that these are not typical spark plug wires. These are upgraded wires. So once again, someone took care of this boat. These are all great signs when you're looking at a boat. So the next thing I like to do is, once you turn the motor over, if you can, if it will start. If it runs, that is great. But the reason I'm checking to see if it runs is because I want this oil to get mixed up. So if there's any water in the engine, it will tell me by that. Because when you pull this up the second time, the oil will be milky. If the oil is milky, that means there's either a bad head gasket or a crack in one of the passages that connects the water to the oil. And that means this motor is basically trash. Now, cracked heads in some places is okay. Like especially on the outside of the motor where water is just leaking out of the head, you actually can go through and weld it, or you can use things like JB Weld to fix it, or even silicone, to be honest. But it's just something that it's less hassle. That means the motor is more in good shape. It also means someone properly winterized it. I live in Virginia, and in Virginia, you got to make sure you winterize your motors, because if you don't, they will crack and you will ruin your motor. That's one huge advantage of outboards. That's why one of the reasons outboards are kind of starting to replace these 100% now is because there's less maintenance. They're easy to take care of. So that's everything on the motor I like to check. Next, if you have power, I like to check everything to see what's working and what isn't. For example, up here, you have all these switches controlling the blower, controlling the bilge pump, the nav lights, the horn. That's all things I like to check because, you know, that's things you have to replace. You have to have a lot of those features to make this boat legal. Once I do all that, I like to check the throttle itself. Make sure it moves freely. Throttle cables are anywhere from $200 to $400 to replace. So it's not the most fun thing to replace. Check the steering, make sure it turns. Hydraulic steering is extremely expensive. And if you have to replace that, you're not gonna have a good time. Finally, once you do that, start the motor, see if it runs. If everything runs good, it probably is good. Make sure you hook water up to it when you run it, and make sure the motor is down when you run it. First off, when it's up, it actually messes with the drive shaft, and it doesn't do the best in the world. It actually can wear out bearings. So you run the motor down, especially on stern drive especially, it allows it to run properly. You also want to run water through it because you don't want to explode the impeller that's inside there. Most likely when you're getting a cheap boat, you're gonna have to replace the impeller. But I've actually gotten a few where I did not have to do that. And you know, that's a nice cost savings. Even though it's not an expensive thing, it is something you have to replace and something to do. So that's what I like to check when I get a free or cheap POS boat. Leave comments below. Tell me anything you do different. The big thing is you're taking a risk when you're getting something this cheap. And what I'm trying to help you avoid is possibly getting a boat that is not worth nearly as much, but they're selling it for more because they're trying to pretend like it's not what it isn't. A lot of people are not honest, and it's just a sad thing about the world we live in. So they'll sell a boat knowing there's something wrong with it, knowing that there's issues, and they'll tell you everything's fine. So unless you do your own due diligence, you might regret it. So the only other thing I would do if you have the time or able to do it is, and not to mention the tools to do it, I would check the compression of the motor. Not everyone has a compression gauge. They're not real expensive, but it's something that not everyone has. I couldn't check this motor because, well, the battery was dead. There's no way I could start it. So that comes to the next point. What to bring with you when you're buying a cheap or free boat. So at the bare minimum, I would bring a flathead screwdriver to check the stern drive, an adjustable wrench because sometimes that bolt is really stuck and you need some leverage to get it off. Not to mention you can remove other bolts on the motor. I would also bring a compression gauge if you have one. I have one, but I don't have one here to show you. Once again, they're very inexpensive on Amazon or even Harbor Freight. I mean, even a cheap one still gets the job done. I also would bring a multimeter to help search out issues if there are issues. And then I would bring a socket set to remove the spark plugs to be able to check that, as well as check the spark plugs. So not that many tools you need to bring, but it definitely will help things. On top of the tools I would also bring a battery if you have it. And if it's an outboard, I would bring the fuel because, you know, they might say, oh, it's out of fuel, you can't test it. So bring it with you. That way you can fully check the boat while you're there and try to save yourself hassle down the road. So that's what I would do when I'm buying a cheap or free boat. You know, there might be more stuff that I haven't experienced, so tell me below. Comment below and tell me what you look for when you're getting a cheap POS boat. I know this content's a little different than usual. I'm during the summer, I like to do more things outside, so we're definitely going to have more videos about this boat. So make sure you like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.